In January of 2017, at the Shabbat service, immediately following the week of the inauguration of our current president, the Washington Post ran in the religion section an article about Temple Micah Shabbat services that week, and they called, the headline of the article was "A House of Mourning" as our house of prayer. If I'm speaking, if you could put on your mute, I think that would be helpful to stay on mute. We're going to go to a question time afterwards. In my sermon remarks, which the Washington Post reporter covered, I'd alluded to the fact that then candidate Trump had said he was going to introduce a registry for Muslims, Muslim citizens of the United States. As you all know, in terms of Jewish history, recent Jewish history, the 20th century, we know what it is for a religious group to have their name on a list. We know what it is to have your name on a list that the powers of the government are keeping. And so I said to my congregation that evening on that Shabbat, if there's going to be a Muslim registry in this country, every member of Temple Micah will probably go and register ourselves as Muslims, because this is what the lesson of our history, I thought, demanded. And the day after this article ran in the Post, I had a voicemail message from a minister in the area who I didn't know. Reverend John Omer speaking, Rabbi Zemel, I read the article in the Post, and I want you to know that if this happens, and you are registering, the members of your community are registering Jews who are registering as Muslims, please give me a call, because my community will join you. We will also register ourselves as Muslims, because that is what the lessons of recent history require of any person of faith. I would say any person of decency. I, of course, called John, and we met very, very shortly thereafter, and a friendship, a budding friendship grew that is even carried as he's moved out of the Washington area to your community. It was a sad day for me when he left. I think I had lunch with John just a couple days before he moved out of town, and but our friendship has continued. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I'll speak for a little bit. As a clergyman who has been speaking in front of the same religious community for well over 30 years, I live in fear of being boring. So the last thing I want to do is bore you folks this morning. So I will try and, I've tried to organize my remarks. I'm going to screen share. You'll be able to see what I'm speaking about. I'm trying to make this as clear as possible. Then I hope to leave plenty of time for you to ask questions, and I'll respond. So once my presented remarks are over, I will leave the screen share so we can all see each other, but I'll go to the screen share now. But as I'm doing that, I just want to commend you for having the wonderful religious leader that you have. John is a remarkable, remarkable person. Okay, so we're going to go to Moses, and I've John. I label this so I can find it in my files. This is the John Omer teaching. I'm teaching about Moses. So I want to give a little bit of background in terms of the way I would say Jews, the vast majority of Jews that you'll meet, I would say virtually every non-Orthodox Jew that you would come across in the United States or in the world. For us, Torah, we use Torah to describe what's called the Bible or the Hebrew Bible. Torah is a story. Torah, Bible, is not a book of science or a history book. I've read the entire Bible many, many, many times. Nowhere does it say at the beginning, based on actual events. Okay, so Torah is a great mythic defining story. It's a defining narrative, and reading it through a Jewish theological lens, Torah is a story of exile. To be a human is to know exile. If you read the creation story carefully in Genesis, Adam is not created in the Garden of Eden. Adam is created and then placed in the Garden of Eden. So from the very, very beginning, to be a human being is to be placed, in a sense, in a foreign habitat. To be a human being is, in a sense, to be an immigrant, to be a kind of refugee from your original place. This is true in the Adam story. It's true in the Abraham story. It's true in the Moses story. The biblical story read through a Jewish prism is a story of exile, which makes home a blessing. Okay, that's the first thing I want to say. Moses in the Jewish religious tradition is referred to as Moshe Rabbeinu. I could translate that as Moses, our rabbi. But Moses is referred to, Moses in this sense is teacher and lawgiver. Rabbinic ordination, I as a rabbi, as an ordained rabbi in the community of Israel, of the Jewish people, every ordination certificate you'll see of an ordained rabbi says on it in Hebrew, these are Hebrew kind of graduation looking documents. An ordination certificate is has a look of a diploma kind of thing. But in Hebrew it says, Yoreh, Yoreh, Yadin, Yadin. Can he teach? He can teach. Can he judge? He can judge. To be a rabbi is to be a spiritual descendant of Moses. We are teachers and we are able to adjudicate Jewish law. Okay, Moses was the law recipient in the story, and Moses then thereby becomes the law interpreter, the law giver. To be a rabbi is to follow this tradition. Moses, of course, is the rabbi par excellence. And then Moses is the ultimate exile. I wrote here, Abraham is the role model in Genesis. I could put maybe that Adam is the original role model for all humanity. Abraham is the role model for the Hebrews, the Israelites. Moses is the one who expands that story. So I'm going to just kind of go down the text here through a few texts I wanted to show you, to give you examples of what I mean of Moses as the exilic figure par excellence. But even as I do this, I want to point out one more an additional thing to you just for your interest. What we have here in chapter 2 is the story of Moses' birth. I just put in bold here, wicker basket and bitumen and pitch. The story of the creation of the basket that Moses' mother puts him into echoes the ark of Noah. Okay, the Hebrew word for wicker basket here is the exact same Hebrew word as Noah's ark. Okay, and the way this wicker basket is made waterproof with bitumen and pitch, this is the exact same description of how Noah builds the ark. Okay, the earliest commentators on this say that this is the only two times in the Hebrew Bible this term is used, is for Noah's ark and for Moses' basket. There are other words for boat and sailing ship that are used in the Bible, other Hebrew words for vessels that go in water. This is the only time this particular word is used, and the earliest interpretations of this word mean that these are water vehicles with no steering mechanism, no oar, no rudder, no nothing. Once you are in this vessel, God is the pilot, so to speak. So where Moses ends up is in God's hand, the same way where Noah ended up was in God's hand. There's no steering mechanism at all in terms of the way this Hebrew term is used. And so you all know the story of Moses' early years. And then Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses, and then I have him build. She brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. I drew him out of the water. Okay, so Minhamayim Mishitihu, Moses is kind of a mystery person in Pharaoh's court, not coming from a mother, so to speak, but as if the daughter finds him out of the water. So he's clearly an Israelite. Okay, because they know he's a Hebrew child, but he then grows up in Pharaoh's court. He's exiled from his own community, brought up as a foreigner in the household of Pharaoh, but they give him this kind of different, mysterious origin of coming straight from the water, so to speak. And then I've continued here, skipping a few verses in chapter 2, and then you all know the story of Moses seeing the taskmaster, Moses killing the taskmaster, and then running away from Pharaoh. And now he's a double exile. He's an exile from his birth community of the Israelites, and now he's an exile from his adopted community of the Egyptians. He ends up yet in another place in Midian, and then he even, the son of his name Gershom. I've been a stranger in a strange land. Ger, the Hebrew word for stranger, is ger. So Moses very, very much the sense of strangeness of being out of place carries on through Moses' child, the firstborn child. I also want to point out, at some point, if you want to reread the story, an interesting way to reread the early chapters of Exodus, which I will not do now. But if you ever want to see a feminist story, it is the early chapters in the book of Exodus. All of the active players are women, okay? Who hides the child? First of all, who is rebelling against Pharaoh's order? The two midwives. Who hides the child? Moses' mother. Who's watching over the child? Moses' sister. Who picks up the child out of the water? Pharaoh's daughter. Who greets Moses when he runs away? At the well, the woman that Moses marries, Zipporah. Okay, who names the child? All of this is a strong feminist chapter in the book of Exodus, and I just wanted to point that out to you in terms of how the Bible can impart its messages so subtly. And then Moses has the encounter at the burning bush, which we're going to get to. But again, in terms of Moses being a stranger from exile, Aaron repeats all the words that Adonai had spoken to Moses. Aaron is Moses' interpreter. Now, we learn at the burning bush that Moses stutters, okay? And what exactly that means, to be aral sfatayim, to be of uncircumcised lips, well, Reverend Omer talked of that in his sermon, but there can be many layers. And it could be, in terms of this scene at all, that Moses spoke with a strange accent to the Israelites. Or perhaps Moses' most fluent language may have been Egyptian, and he was only his second language was Hebrew. Aaron is the one who repeats the words that Adonai had spoken to Moses, okay? This other sense that Moses is not perhaps totally of the community that he is going to leave, and only then the people were convinced. Moses has this sense, even at the bush, that I'm kind of a square peg in a round hole going here. How's this going to be for me? So the first time Moses shows up, kind of the tough gunslinger back in town, well, Aaron, the wingman, has got to take the lead here to be this bridge between Moses and the people. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to kind of point out to you of Moses is this paradigmatic figure of exile, which, as I say, is so critical to the Jewish reading of the Torah story. Then we come to the burning bush, and what I'm going to try and go here. This is God's name unwound, and the important takeaway here that I want to try and take away for you is space and time are categories that do not exist for God. In the Jewish reading of Bible, in the Jewish reading of all of theology, space and time are categories that do not exist for God. Okay, and I think this is one of the many messages that is coming through at the burning bush story. I want to point out, there's so much to point out here. If someone wants to remember to ask me this, I'm not going to go through it now, but the importance of the bush, of this symbol as a flame, as a fire, what that might mean, or what else that carries with it, but I'm not going to go into that now, only if you're interested. But first he says, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. You all will know this story so well, being the good parishioners you are, people who go to church. It's wonderful to talk to people who go to church. I love religious people. And it's the entire, this this climactic back and forth and exchange between Moses, who's fascinated but has this hesitancy. He's drawn to come close. He has to take off his shoes, and he has this amazing conversation with God. And as Reverend Omer, in this humility and this kind of fear and this reluctance, and God is bringing him along. And finally, this climactic moment, they're going to ask me, what's his name? And God said to Moses, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Thus shall you say to the Israelites, Ehyeh sent me to you. And thus shall you speak, the Lord, the God of your fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob has sent me. This shall be my name forever. This is my appellation for all eternity. Okay, so Moses gets God's personal name. Okay, so the first thing to know, and I didn't write down here the first thing to know, is this name in Hebrew is what I call an absolutely impossible Hebrew, biblical Hebrew grammatical construction. In fact, it's not a grammatical construction, it's a grammatical conflagration. If you wanted to take Hebrew grammar apart and try and destroy it to show a kind of uniqueness, you would create this word. This word is an absolutely impossible word because in classical Hebrew, and I'm going to tell a little bit about my knowledge of Hebrew. Modern Israeli Hebrew is, in a sense, for people who studied classical biblical Hebrew. They've butchered the language. I studied Hebrew. I grew up in Chicago, and I went to a Hebrew day school. I went to a classical Hebrew day school where the Hebrew was taught to me primarily by European immigrants who themselves had learned their Hebrew in the classical world of Europe, pre-state Israel, and they taught us Hebrew in a very intense grammatical way. My Hebrew is good because it was jammed into me from the time I was having Hebrew every morning in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, all the way through. So I had 2-3 hours of Hebrew a day in a very heavily grammatic structure way. When I go to Israel and I talk to my cousin's nickname for me is Jeremiah in Hebrew, because they think I'm talking like someone popped out of the Bible, because I speak in this what for me is a correct Hebrew. It's become a living language. There are many fewer grammatical forms. That's a long way of saying Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, has no verb to be. There's no verb to be in Hebrew. That's because the way the But of course, you can speak Hebrew. You can say, I am going, I am walking, I am doing. But what you're saying in Hebrew actually is, I am the person who is a walker. I am the person who is a doer. I am the person who is a builder. Now it comes out to, if you want to, since languages have to be translated colloquially, you would then translate it, I am going, I am doing. You would put in the English word to be, I am, you are, he is. But there really is no he, but you can't, classically the language doesn't work that way. Classically the language doesn't work that way. And what this name for God is, it's taken the words for past, present, and future. It's taken the root word for past, present, and future and jammed it together so that there's no space in between, okay? And since Hebrew is a person-biased language, you're speaking either in terms of a verb, either it's the first person who's doing, or it's either I, you, or he who's doing. God is saying, God is applying to God's self the passage of time, but he's crushed it all together. So it's another way of saying it would be timeless, okay? Past, present, or future. It's another way of saying, I think you've written down here, it's timeless or eternal in first person. Now, Yahweh came about, Jehovah, Yahweh came about because if I'm speaking about God, I can't take this verb on in the first person. It has to be third person. And so once God reveals God's name, you then have in Hebrew, in the Bible, the third person form is used to refer to God. So whenever, I would say the vast majority of the time when you're reading in the Bible and you see the word Lord, it's this name that has come to Moses in the first person but switched into third person. In English translation of the Bible, when you're reading in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the word Lord, L-O-R-D, it's the name that has been revealed to Moses at the burning bush, which is revealed here as a first person word, but it's put in third person Hebrew letters. So it's YHWH or YHVH or Jehovah. I can go more about that, but the Hebrew Bible has a different vowel system. So we'll talk. That's a technical question. If you ask me that question, we'll go down a real rabbit hole. But that's what this is, okay? Now, timeless meaning God does not exist in any moment in time. The same way that we can say God is everywhere. God is with me here in Washington. I'm actually in Arlington. God is with you in Asheville. God is always in Chicago, my hometown. Of course, God lives in a special way in the land of Israel. God is everywhere. Okay, God's in Australia. We can accept that God is everywhere spatially. We can kind of get that into our heads, kind of. What this is saying is God exists in all moments in time simultaneously. We experience time sequentially. For God, there's no such thing as time, which means in God's world, God is simultaneously watching our lesson that we're having right now. At the same time, God is also revealing the Torah at Mount Sinai right now, even as we speak. There's no such thing as time for God. Okay, so the rabbis in the Talmud, this rabbinic work, which is, I'm not going to tell you, but there's an expression that every rabbi keeps in the back of their mind when they're reading Bible, Ein mukdam ve'ein meuchar b'Torah. There is no such thing as sequence in the Bible. The Bible is non-sequential because for God, time is non-sequential. Everything is all at the same time, as it were. I'm not smart enough to keep that thought in my head, but that is all coming out in this one word at the burning bush. And it's of critical importance in terms of understanding the beyondness that God is in the Bible and the beyondness of what God is in terms of the human ability to conceptualize that is being brought into this moment at this burning bush in this wilderness. There is so much packed into this story, okay? So much packed into this story. And the fact that Moses was the one who's able to turn aside and see the bush. The rabbis say, in the earliest commentaries, the bush had been there forever. Because the bush was burning eternally. God didn't just go down there and light the fire kind of 5 minutes before Moses passes by with his sheep. The bush had been burning eternally. He's the only shepherd in the neighborhood. Moses is the one with the what? I don't know what word to use. Instinct, wisdom, know-how, theological sense, breadth of understanding, sense of exile, yearn for something more in his life, who's the one who's able to see this bush burning. It's been burning forever. Moses is the one who's able to see something there. It makes Moses into this, I can't say, it makes Moses into, you can fill in the blank yourself. Okay. So now I'm going to keep going. And this just, I think, is important in terms of the Torah's own understanding of Moses, the way it interprets Moses. I'm just going to jump to the book of Deuteronomy now, and I'm going to try and stop talking in 2 minutes because to leave time for questions for you. Moses dies in exile. This is so important. The theology of Torah, the theology of the Hebrew Bible for Jews, is the theology of the promise unfulfilled. The future is always ahead of us. We pass our dreams to the next generation. And this is Moses' story, and it's one of the most beautiful images, I think, in all of human literature about the hero. Okay, because ultimately this is great, great, great literature. The hero, in classical literature, so many stories where the hero has to go off to prove himself and then come back. This is Moses' story writ large, and he takes on so much, and then this story of his death is so, so, so powerful. He goes up from Sinai, okay? He climbs to Mount Nebo, and God shows him the entire land, okay? Someday you should all go to Israel, because some of the most beautiful parts of Israel are mentioned here, as far as Dan, okay? North to south, all the way. If you go to Israel in the right season, still in the valley of Naphtali, the freshest figs you ever want to eat in your entire life. There's nothing more tasty than a fig from that area. It's fantastic. So he shows him the entire land, and then he harkens back to the burning bush. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The way I introduce myself to you, this is I'm connecting, and this is going to go to you, and this is where you are going to. Your life is going to end, and according to the rabbis, God kisses Moses to draw the last breath out of him, and no one knows his burial place to this day. Talk about being in exile. Even your burial place is a place of exile. Exile par excellence. He's 120 years old, but his eyes were undimmed, his vigor unabated. That's a great euphemism for his manly prowess. And then the Israelites mourn him, and then the transmission is passed on to Joshua. Moses is the figure par excellence. So he goes up to the mountain. On one side, he sees the land that he cannot enter. Now, this vision of the land, okay, this vision of the fertile land, okay, the city of the date palms, what is this? What is God giving Moses a glimpse of in terms of the Bible's literature? He's giving him a glimpse of where the entire story started. This is a revisiting of the Garden of Eden. The promised land is the end of the story. It's the garden, okay? It's the promised land, the land of promise where Moses can't enter. So Moses can't enter, but Moses is able to look down the other side of the mountain, and he sees the Israelites waiting to carry on his story. The book of Deuteronomy ends. You open the book of Joshua, and Joshua and the Israelites are carrying on the story that Moses had left them. And that's the end of Moses' life. Again, whom Adonai had singled out face to face in this unique relationship. Never again. So this is kind of I went as quickly as I could, covering a lot of stuff. I hope I did not go too fast or was not too confusing. I'm going to stop the screen share. I just did kind of in 30 minutes what I maybe done in 3 different 1-hour sessions, bringing some more biblical commentaries to each one from the Bible. But I wanted to get you in one session kind of as full an overview of the way we see Moses in the Jewish religious tradition. So I stuck a lot there. I took a lot out. I don't know how you do question and answer, but I'll do my best to answer any questions that you might have. This might be the most interesting part, anyhow. So I'll stop. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. We have, I do encourage people to use the chat feature. You're always welcome also to just either literally wave your hand or use that little hand wave thing, the reaction thing. And I'm really glad that we recorded this because, yeah, that's a rich feast you set before us. I look forward to going back and unpacking some of that. Wow, thank you. One of the first questions that came in was, if we are indeed all exiles, where is home?
Well, that's a great question. I think exile is exile, I think, is a huge metaphor. Okay, I think to be a human being is, in a sense, to be in exile in the sense that only we know how we feel. Only we know what the inner voice inside of us is telling us. Only we, our lives are lifelong searches to a sense, understand who we are, what our life purpose is. And that's why in the opening verses of Genesis, God says, God has made Adam, and Adam is alone, and God is looking at Adam, and God realizes, oh, it's not good for a person to be alone, and none of the animals work for God's to be Adam's partner, so to speak, to be Adam's helpmate, to use the Adam's acher, to use the Hebrew term helpmate, I think for one of the English translations. So God takes of Adam, okay, of Adam's rib to make Adam's partner, Chava or Eve. So I think that this is the Bible's way of saying that part of the human dilemma is to know that life is a lifelong search to understand yourself. A true blessing is if you have a partner, you can have a deep relationship with, and this is the entire theology of what Jewish marriage is. Jewish marriage, the Hebrew term for marriage in Judaism is the simple term sacred. The marriage bond is a sacred covenant. It's the covenantal bond of God and the people of Israel is mirrored in the covenantal bond between the married couple. So in one sense, home is with every relationship that you seek to connect, and that is why religious communities are so important to us. That to live the religious life alone, in terms of Judaism, is a foreign concept. To be a religious Jew, you need to live in community. You can't be by yourself. And then in terms of where is home, it's why in Judaism the land of Israel is such an important theological component for us. The notion of, in antiquity, we had a home. We grew our values and our understanding of the word there. Our religious literature took shape there. But it's also, I think, why on Jewish homes, in order to say, like on the home I live in, the sense of to have a home is so important. It's why we put what we call a mezuzah. When you walk into a Jewish home, there's an oblong kind of box on the door. Inside the box, there are parchments from the Hebrew Bible. The prayer, the Shema, from the book of Deuteronomy, is on a parchment rolled up inside, where it says, "Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, and Adonai is one. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might." That our homes, the Jewish home, is in a sense a kind of refuge from exile. I think for Jews, another kind of metaphoric home is the Bible itself. We made the home portable, that we could take it with us when we went into exile, where we find our home in the ideas and the beliefs that ground us, that moor us, that make us who we are and who we aspire to be. I guess that's a partial answer to the question. We live in an unredeemed world, so the ultimate home is, again, always just beyond our grasp. That's it's a hard question.
Here's another one. Your interpretation of the Lord's name suggests to me that living human beings are stuck in time, but that perhaps after death we're freed from that limitation. Does that make sense in the Jewish tradition?
Well, my immediate answer to that question is yes, because in the Jewish tradition, everything makes sense. Because we are, I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Judaism is not a doctrinal religion. So, on any given subject, there are a myriad of Jewish beliefs and interpretations. We are a religion where that requires commentary, and the next commentary disagrees with the previous commentary. So, yes, in our time here on earth, we are time bound, and perhaps in the next life we become free of that dimension, and we have a different kind of liberation or freedom. That would be a totally possible way that a Jewish person could look at that and live with that and aspire for that after death. Having said that, I will say this. My answer is an unequivocal yes. At the same time, I will say this. Judaism is not a doctrinal religion, but Judaism for sure places a heavy, underlined 10,000 times intense value on this life. We will throw every Jewish law out the window in order to save a human life. You can violate any tenet of Jewish faith if you have the opportunity to save a life, except for 3. You cannot murder someone in order to save a life, because you cannot decide whose blood is redder, whose life is more worthwhile. And you cannot commit a violent sex crime in order to save someone's life. Okay, if someone says to you, go rape somebody and I won't kill that person, you can't do that. The third thing you can't do is you can't, in public, deny the existence of God. Now, the third one is under debate. The third one, there's a back and forth on in the Bible. Now, the reason that one has to be there is because the reason the life is of ultimate value to begin with is because it's all rooted in a system from the Torah that comes from God. So if you take God out of the system, then everything becomes up for grabs. So on the other hand, I say, listen, you can't admit it because the entire system is about saving God. So that one becomes kind of a tautology that there's no right answer to. But in terms of anything else, you can eat pork on a fast day if doing so will save someone's life. You can violate every Sabbath law if doing so will save a life. You can do anything in order to save a life. Judaism places such primary value on the dignity of all human life. That's the entire, well, you know that. All the rest is commentary, said Hillel. What is hateful to you, don't do someone else. All the rest is commentary. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the rest is commentary. So that one you all know.
I saw Ross Jones, you had your hand up a while ago. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask something? There we go. Ross, you're going to have to unmute yourself. There you go.
I enjoyed the unpacking of the word Moses. But if I remember from many years gone by, the word Moses has its origin in Egypt. It means son of, and they refer to the Pharaoh, Tutmoses, son of Tut. so that it is possible that Yahweh was put in there by the Hebrews when Moses was there. So it was Yahweh Moshe. That's such as the same as Tut Moshe. The other is much more trivial than that. But if you were a Muslim, you would know where Moses is buried. And I have been to his burial site. It is about halfway between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. It's not very well maintained. Chickens abound around the one old guy lives there, but he doesn't do a very good job of maintaining. So just out of trivia, I would mention that one. So you don't need to respond to that. But what about Moses being an Egyptian word?
The Hebrew, I agree with you. Pharaoh's daughter gives Moshe a Hebrew name. The Hebrew explanation in Torah, Min Hamayim Mishitihu, is an attempt to underscore the miraculous sense, but Moshe, they say, is not originally a Hebrew name. Now, yeah, but I want to separate in your head Moses' name from God's name, Yahweh's name. These are two different things, and there's no relationship between Moses' name and God's name. Yahweh, what I described, is a deliberate, biblical, unique Hebrew construct. That does not come from Egyptian. That is a unique biblical Hebrew construct that is making the theological point that I tried to make. In terms of Moses' burial place, as I said at the very, very beginning, this is all a story. I do not believe that Moses was a real historical figure. There is no Moses for you, but Moses is a figure in a story. In terms of the Jewish reading of the Bible, Abraham did not exist, Isaac did not exist, Jacob did not exist, Moses did not exist. These are figures. These are literary figures. These are literary constructs. The Bible, as I said, is a religious book. It is not based on actual events. So in terms of, in the telling of the story, that Moses' burial place is not known, this is to underscore his sense of, as the exilic figure. It's to make a religious theological point about him. So I know that other religious traditions, and even within Judaism, many, I would say probably most of the Orthodox today, not all of the Orthodox, there's a significant portion of the Orthodox community that understands the Bible is a mythic book and not based on actual events. But apart from the Orthodox, modern Jews understand that the Bible is a great mythic narrative that comes to define us, and the entire story of enslavement, the entire narrative of this. This is a story. This is not an historical reality. There's no archaeological evidence that shows that coheres with any event in the Bible until you get approximately to the era of King David. So everything in the 5 books of Moses is the brilliant, genius literary creation of the ancient Israelites, as a way to create an inspiring myth to understand and define and create their own faith. So in terms of the Muslims know the burial site of Moses, these things all date to the Middle Ages and earlier. virtually, I go to Israel every year, a couple times every year. I could be, I could be a licensed Israeli tour guide almost. I've been every single place. I know the history of every single place. These places, claims are made for these places, but they're not real in that sense, in terms of that's actually where Moses is buried. Somebody in the Middle Ages decided Moses was buried there and made that into a spot. The same is true of the cave of the patriarchs, the burial cave of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This became a designated spot. The patriarchal spot may go back to Constantine's mother. She's the one who went to Israel and said, this happened here, and this happened here, and this happened here, and thus these associations with these locations took root. But these are not historically real. The wall of the temple is, of course, historically real. That wall is from the Second Temple. We're already in the Common Era in real historic times. And there are other excavations. Now they're excavating the city of David outside the wall of the old city, if you know Jerusalem well. And there they've discovered. So the earliest archaeological evidence for anything in the Bible goes back the earliest to King David. So that's my answer to that. I'll tell you a great story. The founder. In Israel, there's a ministry of tourism which certifies guides, and this the guide school, which is run by the Ministry of Tourism, was founded in the early 50s as the young state was trying to create a tourism industry, and one of the founders of the guide school was someone I think named Vilnai. Anyhow. In the introduction to the first guide manual, he tells the story, which I'll try and tell very, very, very quickly. He's giving a tour on a tour bus in Israel sometime in the 1950s, and the tour bus breaks down, okay, in the middle of the Negev desert, somewhere outside of Beersheba, okay? And so he sends the driver to walk to find a phone. And this is the early 50s where, you weren't going to find a pay phone. The driver's going to have to walk. So meanwhile, he's got this bus full of tourists there, 30, 40 people. They're in the desert. They all have kind of canteens. He's got to entertain them. So they're sitting on the side of this dusty road in the desert, in the Negev. And he says, well, the bus broke down at kind of a convenient place because over there, and there's a little hill there, there's a big boulder on top of the hill. That boulder is actually a famous spot from the Bible, and he's making this up as he goes along. He says, that boulder is the famous boulder of Samson. That's Evan Shimshon. That's Samson's boulder, he says. And it's kind of amazing that we're here because this wasn't really on the itinerary, but the bus broke down here. We're waiting for someone to come get us. But we're here at Samson's boulder. He says that in the area, there are kind of some Bedouin kids there kind of listening. The guy talks to the Bedouin kids, and the Bedouin kids listening to him tell the story and this and that. So time goes by. He comes by this area 5 years, and he hears there's a bus stopped to the side of the road right at that spot, and a guide has gotten people off the bus. He says, I just stopping the bus here. We're on our way back to Tel Aviv, but I just want to tell you, that's Samson's boulder. The Bedouin kids had kind of told other people, and other people come. Eventually, there's a gas station there, and it's become a spot, Samson's boulder. He made it up sometime in 1954, and that story is the introduction to the first ever kind of guidebook for touring Israel that was a required reading for everybody that went through this Ministry of Tourism guide program. So I think that in a similar way is how that the burial spot of Moses someplace became kind of these things take on myths, they take on life of their own. So if you go to Israel, you can ask your guide, take me to Samson's boulder. It's somewhere in the Negev outside of Beersheba.
I have a not so much a question, but invitation to unpack that a bit. Talk a bit more about when you talk. Oftentimes, the word myth is used pejoratively, like, "Oh, that's just a myth." Or that people are just, as a way of dismissing sort of some, rumor or something like that. But say more about the difference between truth and facts, because, not to put words in your mouth, but these stories convey truth about God, even if they're not based in historical facts, the way modern scientific rationalist person would think of sequential history, right? But what I'm intrigued by is if the stories live in the realm of myth, what makes them true, and what is the counter argument if someone says, well, all those stories are myth, those people didn't really exist, therefore how do we know with any kind of confidence that God is a God who delivers oppressed people from slavery?
Those are great questions. Yes, I do not use the word myth in the sense of that's all just a myth. For me, our lives are defined by the myths that we live within. A narrative is another word. There's no human life without living within a narrative. The narrative creates the plausibility structure in which our lives are lived. We're right now living through an era where there's in this country as Americans where there's huge debate over what is the narrative that we want to live under. I mean, this is what's dividing the country more than anything else. Who are we as Americans? What does it mean to be an American? What is our defining narrative? What is our defining myth? Okay, so in terms of Judaism and faith, right, and I'll stop using the word myth. My narrative, my Jewish narrative, defines ultimate truths for me by which I live my life. Okay, I know that if there's nothing worth dying for, there's nothing worth living for. That my life is a gift, and I have to be prepared to sacrifice myself for things that I believe. There are red lines in life. There are places I cannot cross. I cannot kill somebody except in self-defense. Okay, there are things that simply we must do. If a person is hungry, it is my obligation to feed them. If someone is an other, my obligation is to welcome them into Abraham's tent. Okay, this is the religious narrative that defines my life, that defines much of the life of people who are Jewish. My assertion, for which I have no proof, that these are rooted in a sacred story. It is rooted in an understanding and a belief in God. Now, this is very, very, very complicated. I do not believe that God is a discrete entity out there, kind of with a supercomputer. God is not that kind of discrete Superman. I've come to prefer the word godly to God. Certain things are godly. I can't point to a thing as God. I can't point to an entity as God. That's the point of that entire word of that YHWH, that Yud Hey Vav Hey. Okay, God is that which I can create metaphor after metaphor after metaphor, but I can't point to an it or a being. Okay, but I can't point to what is godly. Love is godly. Okay, helping someone is godly. Okay, teaching a child is godly. These are things that are godly, that I know God wants me to do, for which there is no proof, and that's what faith means. Okay, I live by life by that faith. I can't. Maybe I can prove that 2 + 2 is 4. You know, 2 stones and 2 stones. Now there's 4 stones. But I cannot bring proof to this sense of faith. But I draw a red line, and I plant my flag there. And this is where the Jewish people have historically planted their flag. And I'll say one more thing, John, in terms of the question you ask, because it's an ongoing debate within my own head. I think it's the ongoing debate within the head, when they're thinking about it, of every modern religious Jew. or not a question, it's an understanding. My Judaism is an ongoing conversation with the Enlightenment. My Judaism is an ongoing conversation with the Enlightenment, because I know science points to truths. I'm going to read to you one section that I've been bringing regularly. This book by Brian Greene, Until the End of Time, is a beautiful, beautiful book by this big brain physicist at Columbia. And I'm going to read to you one little thing, and then we can, I'm wasting your time. Okay. Hang on a second. Okay. He writes, okay, I'm just going to read it. Okay, here. Through language, stories explode the limits that would otherwise be imposed by our own narrow experiences. Okay, a story gives me an outlet to get beyond my own personal experience, to inhabit worlds beyond worlds beyond worlds. And then he says, sometime in the future, if we here on Earth finally play host to visitors from a distant world, you know, if someday Martians come, or even they come from the Mars in the next galaxy, okay? Sometime in the far future, if we finally play host to visitors from a distant world, our scientific narratives will contain truths they will have likely discovered too, and so will have little to offer. In other words, when the Martians come, they're going to know about gravity, they're going to know about nuclear, they're going to know about all the science we know. How else could we have met someplace, okay? Our human narratives will tell them who we are. The Bible tells me who I am. The Bible has defined what it means to be a human being in a particular way. And that's where I plant my flag, as a human being. Okay? So that's my answer. And it's an answer that always requires another answer, because no answer to that question can ever be complete. Okay, thank you.
Wow, thank you. And folks, I hope you see why I was so excited that Rabbi Zemel decided to say yes to this invitation to be with us this morning. When we got together on a almost monthly basis with a small group of clergy that we put together in the past 3 years, one of the things I just loved doing was bringing in a journal and writing down everything that I heard, just drinking deeply of wisdom. So what a treat. And maybe the best way to conclude our thanks to you is to say, Rabbi Zemel, you are godly. And it was a godly time to have you with us and to drink deeper of these marvelous passages. So many, many thanks on behalf of All Souls Cathedral for your time with us. I'm already getting a chat there that says, when can he come back? So, so thank you again. And thanks everyone. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you so much. It was a great honor. I love you, John Omer. Take care.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.